There was once an old hospital nestled within Addis Ababa. Built over 80 years ago, it was rumored to harbor countless secrets. But the most terrifying of all was the sealed laboratory deep within its cellar. The staff never discussed it. Some didn't even know it existed. Yet, every single employee harbored one inviolable rule in their heart. Do not go down to the cellar. But Thomas, a newly hired young laboratory technician, dismissed these old wives' tales. Unbelieving and curious, he repeatedly questioned the long-serving veterans who had worked at the hospital for decades. "Why is it closed?" he would ask. But no one ever gave him a straight answer. They would avert their eyes, turn their faces, and walk away. And then it happened. Thomas was working the graveyard shift. Outside, a violent storm was in full swing. Lightning ripped the sky apart, and thunder convulsed the ground. But inside the hospital, everything was silent as the grave. The clock struck exactly 8:13 when the power suddenly cut out. For a few seconds, everything plunged into darkness. The entire hospital was swallowed by pitch black. Then, the emergency lights flickered on, dim and red. They began to pulse in the rooms and around large and small machines. At that moment, Thomas heard a sound. The sound Thomas heard was the elevator. But there was one massive problem. The elevator had stopped going to the cellar and had been sealed for 40 years. For 4 decades, no one had been able to go down. Thomas slowly, cautiously approached the elevator. The door was slightly ajar. Among the listed elevator buttons, a new light, one he had never seen before, was glowing. It was B2. This button had never worked. Who did this? He thought, wondering who could have made it work, when suddenly, almost of its own accord, his hand reached out. In a split second, before he could think, he pressed B2, and then the elevator began to descend down into the darkness. 1 floor, 2 floor, 3, 4. It was dropping far below any hospital map. Finally, it stopped. B2. The doors slid open. Directly in front of the doors lay a pitch-black corridor. Old bloodstains were visible on the walls. The air was thick and suffocating with the smell of rotting chemicals. Thomas ventured into the corridor. Finally, he found a massive door. A sign was plastered on the door. Laboratory 9. Sealed, do not open. Thomas pushed the door. It opened slowly. Inside, old microscopes, slides, and dust-covered research papers were scattered everywhere. But in the middle of the room, a large glass tank stood. The tank appeared to be empty. Near the tank, he picked up a fallen paper and read it. It read, "Sample 13 can grow in human blood. Sample 13 can learn. Sample 13 can mimic humans." Thomas trembled with terror. His throat went dry. In blind, sheer panic, he quickly read the final line. "Sample 13 has escaped." At that exact moment, a voice suddenly rasped from behind him. "Who allowed you in here?" Terrified, Thomas whirled around. But when he looked, he couldn't believe his eyes. He saw himself, a person who looked exactly like him. The same face, the same clothes, the same voice. But his eyes were completely, entirely black. That black-eyed creature grinned maliciously. Then, in a cold voice, he said, "I've been waiting for 40 years, and now I need you to climb back up.